the most valuable thing to do right now, in addition to social distancing, is set up some place where you could go get isolated.
That was March 2020 when Dr. Mehmet Oz joined Dr. Drew Pinsky and myself for a nightly show we hosted throughout the pandemic. Now, Dr. Oz has been appointed by President-elect Trump to serve as the administrator for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Meanwhile, he'd potentially work with Trump's pick for Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., another friend of our next guest. Dr. Drew Pinsky is a board-certified internist and longtime TV host. You can find his work at drdrew.com. Dr. Drew, welcome back to The Issue Is. So good to see you.
Alex, it is. I was sitting here thinking as you were ramping up, my goodness, I feel like we were like war buddies, like we were in combat together. We're being reunited at a VA center.
Yeah, although doing it from a studio, a lot better than actually being out in war.
Doing it from a studio, and yet if people remember, all you got to see of us typically was two windows, much like you're looking at now, and they had us separated on either side of the room. Do you remember that?
It was wild, everything that we did during that time, and we'll go back and talk about that time in a moment and about Trump's picks, but the broad idea, and this is really a Bobby Kennedy Jr. idea, of make America healthy again, which is something that Donald Trump is embracing. What does that mean to you?
Well, it means asking questions. I don't know if you've noticed, but one of the sort of phenomena that was laid bare by COVID was this phenomenon of you don't ask questions, you just toe the party line, which is the opposite of science, was the opposite of how healthcare has always been done. And just asking, now we can now ask simple questions, and it's really Bobby Kennedy that's been spearheading this. We can ask without any prejudicial sense of what is causing these things. We just need to ask, why so much chronic disease? Why so much obesity? Why so much autism? And we need to answer those questions. That's all. Just answer the questions, not assume we're going to find one explanation or another, but we can now start to look at those things. Now, in the process of doing so, we have to understand that there's been some encumbrances in our regulatory bodies and in our NIH and the Research Center, and that too was laid bare by COVID.
Yeah. What do you think, though, of Donald Trump, who frequently eats McDonald's and KFC and drinks Diet Coke, being the Make America Healthy Again guy?
Well, the irony is not lost on me, Alex, and I appreciate bringing that up. But one of the things I want to say about that, look, whatever he's done for him, whether or not he could extend his life further, he probably could. But I hope I'm as good as him when I'm his age. But the reality is, be really careful here. There's so many opportunities where we might end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I know Bobby Kennedy, if he is put at the head of HHS, wants to look into agriculture. Now, that business is structured a certain way for a certain reason, and I don't want him to destroy that business. By the same token, I don't want anybody forbidding people from choosing whatever foods they want to eat, even if they're unhealthy. If that's what you're going to do, great. But to be more transparent about these things and to have campaigns to help people make better choices, I think that is incumbent upon us to do.
So during COVID, we talked with Dr. Oz at least once a week, if not more, and his appointment immediately made me think of you. Obviously, he's got a lot of critics out there as well. What do you make of Dr. Oz's appointment?
Well, of all there have been so many people in the COVID and post-COVID era that have become targets of abuse. And when it comes to people like Jay Bhattacharya and Mehmet Oz, they are poster children for the excesses of people criticizing other people. Mehmet Oz was the chairman of the Department of Cardiovascular Surgery at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital for years, when that was one of the highest level of achievement a doctor could have in this country, period. I know Mehmet. He is a brilliant guy. He's a well-meaning guy. He only wants to serve and do good. And now he's at a point in his life where he wants to do that through political the political process. I support him fully. And you got to know him a little bit. If you remember during the show, he was the first one that alerted us to in fact, I think I was in South Carolina when we actually first had him on. And we were sort of rushed the show to air, and he was our guest on the first night, and he brought up this strange syndrome called cytokine storm, something that none of us had ever heard of before that, and he brought it to us that very first night.
And that clip that I showed at the beginning of this segment was from that night.
That night?
Yeah. Meanwhile, RFK Jr.'s critics slam his vaccine skepticism. They're concerned that could increase diseases if he says gets away from vaccine mandates for something like polio. What say you?
Yeah. Well, listen, I first interviewed Bobby Kennedy about 2.5 years ago, like really just after you and I stopped working together. We built this studio in our home, and I just started talking to people. There I am with him in Albuquerque, where we were doing a symposium about addiction and solutions for homelessness and whatnot. But first night I met with him, he said two things that jumped out at me struck me blind. One was, he leaned in, he goes, "Drew, you're so brave to talk to me." And I thought, brave that a physician and attorney should talk in a public, that requires bravery? We have a problem. And then the free speech assault was happening immediately following that, and the Twitter files were laid bare afterwards. So yes, we did have a problem, and that was symptomatic of that. And then number two, he persuaded me, and I've had multiple conversations about this since, something that I was not aware of, which was the excessively cozy relationships and the adulterating influence of our regulators and our pharmaceutical organizations. That needs to be unraveled. And also what became clear to me during COVID was that included not just our regulatory organizations, but even some of our medical societies and definitely our medical publications. Throughout COVID and in the years following COVID, the publishing process was severely adulterated, and you could see it loud and clear because there were no dissenting data presented on topics that were important. And that's never been the case in the medical literature. It's always a back and forth until you reach a consensus between the positive results and the negative results. You only saw positive results in certain areas, and that you knew immediately there was some problem with that. So I look forward to him, and he knows how to do that. He knows how. I mean, he turned the Hudson River from one of the dirtiest bodies of water to one of the cleanest bodies of water in the country, and he did it by looking at large organizations, looking at their adulterating influences, untangling it, and getting things right. I welcome that.
So how do you think healthcare changes with RFK Jr. as HHS secretary if he's confirmed?
I don't think healthcare changes so much as pharmaceuticals change. I don't think we'll see them advertised on television. I think the way we do medicine and the way we approach our responsibility as physicians is going to change a little bit if we can remove some of these adulterating influences. Like you and I had an exchange once that I will never forget. We were talking about, I don't know, one of the drugs of the day that were controversial. And I said something like, if physicians want to do that on behalf of their patients, they need to be at their liberty to do so. And you said, what about the FDA? And I thought, oh my God, people think the FDA determined the practice of medicine. I taught medicine for years. Here's some words that never came out of my mouth. What does the FDA think about this? Ever. The FDA has no effect on the practice of medicine. What it affects is what pharmaceuticals and medical product suppliers can bring to market and under what conditions. What we do as physicians is entirely up to us. But the range of what we can get, the data about what it is we are doing, particularly in the oncological space and in the autoimmune space, that data needs to be improved. The publications need to be cleaned up. And then that relationship between regulators and pharmaceuticals needs to be teased apart.
And lastly, we were together for so much of COVID, and the way people think about that period is different now that we have 2020 hindsight. What do you think is the biggest lesson, biggest takeaway from that period?
There were so many. For me, when you say that, what occurs to me is the black-white, so to speak, the no gray thinking that people have about that period. And you and I both know, Elex, every night we were just navigating, right? We were trying to figure out what's right, what's wrong. I remember we were in there the night they decided to close the schools, and we had somebody from the school board, and I was like, who told you to do this? I've revisited that tape a number of times. No consultant, no doctor, no public health official. He said, it's just the right thing to do. And those sorts of excesses and the lack of risk reward analysis and the, all one way, all the other way thinking was the enemy. Things are very nuanced in medicine. For instance, you can say the vaccine saved lives in the darker hours of Alpha and Delta, at the same time as you can question whether a 22-year-old should be getting a booster in the current era. You can do these things. You can hold two ideas in mind and try to ascend to the truth. It's not all one way or the other. And people have way too much what we call, what I now call irrational certitude. Irrational certitude ruled the day, and it's a problem. And people should be in a healthier space of rational uncertainty.
We'll wrap things up with our favorite game here, personal issues. These are your cultural favorites. First thing that comes to mind, since we haven't caught up in a while. So you ready, Dr. Drew?
Am I ready? It's a relative question. Go ahead.
What is the favorite TV show you've binged lately?
That I binged on? Probably, what's the one that Gene Smart is in?
Hacks on HBO. Favorite movie you've seen lately?
I have not been to a movie in forever, but I am going to see Gladiator 2.
Okay. Favorite podcast other than your own?
There's a podcast called, it's Sean Carroll's podcast. He's a Caltech professor. He was a Caltech professor about physics. I'm a ridiculous nerd. It's pathetic.
And what is your favorite holiday tradition?
Thanksgiving dinner with as much of the family and extended family I can get together. Thanksgiving was always my favorite holiday because there was nothing but gathering together, and it's a great time of year in this part of the country in particular. I just love that meal. It's
not about who can spend the most money on gifts, but it's about spending time together as a family and eating a lot, and football. All are great. So we wish you and your family, your lovely wife Susan, and your whole crew a very happy Thanksgiving.
Dr. Drew.
Grandfather.
Imagine that. My son's going to have a baby in January, so get ready for that, Elex.
Happy. Congratulations to you. Very cool. Grandpa,
Weird.
Dr. Drew Pinsky. We'll be right back with more of The Issue Is to wrap things up. Thanks so much for watching.